is I am going to talk a little. I'm going to swear a lot. If you have children around, you may want to use headphones. And then I'm really hoping we can have a fun, candid conversation afterward. That's my favorite part, is the afterwards. I really want some feedback. I'm not going to give you a lot of solutions today, but I think talking about what's going on, what we're seeing in our industry, and knowing that other people are going through the same thing can be really helpful. So my name is Karen. I really wish my parents had named me something else, but we didn't know what Karen was going to become. We didn't know the meme was going to happen. So I'm the good kind. I promise I've never asked to speak to anyone's manager. I'm at Designing Inward on Twitter. And I've been working in tech for a very long time. My first job in tech was actually in 1993. And then specifically in different roles across user experience, particularly in research and information architecture for over 15 years. And so I recognize that the problems we're trying to solve are complex, and the systems we work on and in are gnarly, and that makes the work by its very nature hard, okay? But lately, the work doesn't just feel hard, it's starting to feel bad, like existential crisis bad. And I've been talking to other people in the industry, and it seems like everyone I talk to is at the end of their rope. You know, 2020 was a universally shitty year, but the real problem with the past year or so hasn't just been the pandemic, but what the pandemic and the behaviors around the pandemic have revealed to us. So today, like I said, I want to talk to you really candidly about how hard our work is and why it often seems harder than it should be. And I want to talk to you about how we get wicked good, because that's what we seem to need when we work in environments that seem increasingly set up for failure. And thank you for a dog showing up. I already feel better. So we're going to start this.
And also, I want to give a shout out to Karen. Karen and I met through Twitter, and I'm so excited to finally get a chance to meet with you in person. And we were chatting over in the Zoom room, our
private Zoom.
VIP. It was our VIP room that everyone was invited to. We just didn't know about exactly this, about like all the weirdness from the pandemic that you can possibly expect. So your talk is beyond timely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Holly. So we're going to start, as many of my journeys do, at the base of a mountain. And I bet a lot of you can relate to this. I tend to be a swirler. So when I'm struggling with a personal or professional challenge, I can get into like this unproductive mental tailspin. And historically, I've always kind of been able to like ground myself in nature. So I do a lot of hiking now, and that's been a transition after years of riding horses and competing in distance riding. And this is kind of how I kind of balance out my professional life with my personal life. So this little story I'm going to tell happened in late 2019. Our country was a mess. My personal relationship was a mess. My job was a mess. And I found myself at the base of a mountain in New Mexico trying to fix all my problems and all the world's problems, because that's what you do, right? And I have done more challenging hikes than this, but something was off with me that day. Something in me like emotionally broke on that trail. And there's a tiny blue dot on this all trails map. And I literally have like a series of 4 or 5 pictures. Like I was on the trail for over 3 hours at this point, and I still hadn't reached the summit. And I could not believe that I wasn't there yet. And I thought about turning back, but I'm like, I gotta be just about there. And I finally made it to the top. And then I had to turn down and go back down, and massive boulders, loose rocks. This is a high desert at like 8,000 feet, 8,000 feet above sea level. And if you've done any type of hiking, you know that many times going down on this type of terrain is a lot harder than going up. And this is something I normally enjoy, but I could not get off that mountain fast enough. I have never so desperately wanted to be done with something in my life. And so when I came back to my car, just covered in sweat and tears, there was a single thought. running through my head. And it was, why do I fucking do this to myself? Why is my solution when things get hard to just throw more different hard things on my plate? And I had been looking through for a breakthrough. Instead, I had a breakdown. And I started reflecting on that. And there's a parallel here, right? Because the thing about higher altitudes is that they make everything you do harder. So 5 miles at 8,000 feet is a very different experience than 5 miles at sea level. So I'm going to tell you a little secret. The problem was not the mountain. The problem was everything else going on in my life. My problem was that I was using the wrong things to try and fix problems in my current context and environment. So the problem with training at sea level is that it in no way prepares you for the challenges of working at altitude. And then I came across this concept of kind versus wicked environments, and something clicked for me. So this is the book Range by David Epstein, and I came to him through a documentary called In Search of Greatness, which I highly recommend. And he interviews top athletes about their early life and explores kind of nature versus nurture to identify like shared mindsets in those who become truly great. And there's something really intriguing in that. So I got this book, and so much of what he was talking about aligned with what I was experiencing, what I had experienced for years, but hadn't been able to articulate about our work. And basically, there are two very different kinds of environments we can play in and can work in. And the skills and preparation required for one don't work for the other. So kind environments are domains where rules are really clear and well articulated, situations are extremely consistent, and feedback is clear and immediate. So these types of environments reward things like specialized training and repetition. So from a sport perspective, these are things like chess and golf, if you consider chess a sport, and music would be classical music. But when I look at this, none of these things seem true about the type of work we do. So most knowledge work, which is the work we do, falls into what Epstein calls the wicked domain. And their rules are unclear or maybe don't even exist at all. There might be patterns to leverage, but there might not be. And if those patterns do exist, they exist at a much deeper and more abstract level. And feedback, if it comes at all, is often delayed and often unreliable. So think about American football, right? You're responding, people are trying to kill you, think about improvisational jazz, that kind of thing. And maybe a really good way to understand the difference between these two environments is that a computer can and has learned to play chess well enough to beat a grandmaster, because chess is an extremely kind learning environment. However, there is yet to be a dating app in the world that can find me a suitable partner, because my mental and emotional life is absolutely a wicked environment. So you cannot algorithmize wicked environments. So here's the problem. Working in these wicked hard environments is hard enough, but if you try to navigate these environments using practices from kind environments, it's a recipe for disaster. So I started thinking that, okay, maybe this is one of my problems, that I've kind of been using the wrong stories and the wrong examples to inform my journey. So I started wondering, what does it take to be wicked good? And Epstein goes into a lot of detail in his book, but basically it's these kinds of things: knowledge transfer, cognitive flexibility, analogical thinking. They all come from a breadth of training, which then creates a breadth of transfer, right? So the more context in which you learn something, the more you can create abstract models, and then the better you become at applying knowledge to new or novel situations. This skill is the essence of creativity. So when I start to think about getting wicked good from this lens, it made me reflect on how we typically think of our career progressions, and made me wonder about what types of mindset shifts we could make to better navigate these wicked environments. So we normally think of a career progression as a set of stairs or a ladder, something really straightforward and linear. I'm an associate designer, senior, principal, or if you're on a management track, it might look a little different. But people who have a lot of success in wicked environments often have more meandering career paths, because being wicked good isn't just about becoming good. It's about being able to endure long enough to build wisdom needed to excel in these environments. So it's not just about growth, but about enduring sustainable growth. So the mindset I'm looking at now is kind of this competency to mastery to wisdom. And we start by building competency, which is just being able to consistently do something well. And this is where the process that Epstein calls sampling occurs. And this is where it's really beneficial to dip your toe into a lot of things at this stage, because that's how you start building that flexibility and adaptability needed in wicked environments. And this is what concerns me a bit in our industry when we get people doing really specialized work early in their careers. They don't get the benefit of this sampling. So I'd really encourage you, if you're at the start of your career or in the middle of your career, consider yourself an eternal beginner and always be sampling in some new place. But then obviously at some point you want to work towards mastery, which implies a broader, more comprehensive set of knowledge skills. And there's a great TED talk called Embrace the Near Win, where Sarah Lewis talks about the difference between success and mastery. And it's in the pursuit. She says mastery is not a commitment to a goal, but a constant pursuit. And that means working in this stage is about falling in love with the process of our work, not the outputs of it. So I don't know if any of you saw a few months ago, there was a woman who had done a video on Twitter, like just freaking out, like, I chose user experience for my career. The problem was she was attached to outputs of her work, and she hadn't yet learned to fall into love with the process of her work. But after mastery comes wisdom, hopefully. As all of us have experienced, it doesn't necessarily come for everybody, but that's the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, insight. It's about developing good instincts and being able to leverage all that knowledge, being able to extract foundational lessons from it, and then apply it in novel ways. And one other way I think about this is laying character on top of competence. In his book, Think Like a Monk, Jay Shetty talks about the importance of nurturing both competence and character, and says that competence without character is narcissism. I think some of us have experienced people in our field with this trait. But on the flip side, character without competence lacks impact. So an enduring, impactful career needs both. So I'm going to give you just a few examples of what it might look like if we reframe our work through this lens of a wicked good mindset. These are just examples to get you thinking what your path might look like. And if you're feeling a little stuck, maybe consider what stage you're in and ask yourself, is what worked for you in the past still working for you now? And if it isn't, maybe the thing that needs to shift is the way you think about your work. And so because I'm known to wring every last drop out of a metaphor, we're going to stay with kind of like the hiking theme. And so gear represents the tools we use to get our job done. And the way we think about and interact with our tools changes as we move through our career. For hiking, this is like the clothes we wear, backpacks, hiking poles. In endurance riding, it was also the tack my horse wore. And for designers, it's Sketch and Figma, if you're me, Sharpies and Post-its, to the different templates and frameworks we use. And as someone who's dabbled in different types of endurance sports, something I see consistently is how excited people are to get all the new gear, because a lot of times buying that first piece of equipment is what makes you feel like you're now a member of the community. But while obviously we need our tools, they're important, they're there to support your journey. They're not the purpose of it. And that means that as you spend more time in any environment, you start to value new and cool a lot less than tested and reliable. And I have firsthand experience with this. One of the biggest challenges of any endurance sport is underwear. There are a few things that make just more distracting and downright painful than making unfortunate undergarment choices that you have to live with for 50 miles. So tools that have been tested and proven to be reliable for you in lots of different contexts are really valuable as you work towards mastery. And then the longer your journey is, the more you start thinking about and quite literally feeling how your tools both support you and weigh you down. Thinking about our tools as gear can help us evaluate their virtual weight against their practical utility and help us ask if the tools are supporting our track or if they're directing it or derailing it. And a few months ago, there was some asshole on Twitter who was deriding a job candidate for listing Balsamique. If you're not familiar, it's a really simple wireframing tool on their resume. So first, that's a really privileged gatekeeping attitude because it's a lightweight, low-cost tool. But also, good tools don't weigh us down. And Balsamique is a really great little tool if you need to wireframe from a minimalist and flexible perspective. So first, a big middle finger to that dude on Twitter. And second, we have to keep our gear into perspective. Wayfinding is how we figure out where we're going, right? And when you've never been somewhere, you usually need a map. And if you Google design thinking, for example, the consistency of images you'll get on the results will show you that it's very clearly a kind of map. And map serves a couple of purposes. They help us figure out where to go, but they also help us learn to recognize patterns we can leverage, even when maps don't exist. Learning to read a map helps us learn to recognize things like grid systems and spoke and wheel systems, but maps are limiting also. One, they often only give you one option to get where you want to go, even if there are other ways to get there. Maps make a lot of assumptions about your journey that don't take into account its purpose. For example, the most direct route is not always the desired route, particularly in our work. And I guarantee if you've ever tried to get from the top to the bottom of a place like Indiana without going through Indianapolis, which is a complete clusterfuck, you've experienced this. That direct route was not your desired route. Secondly, maps are massive oversimplifications. They're about routes, directions, north and south, right or left. They're not about journeys and the experience of the journey. There's no recognition of individual context or the impact of environmental or personal conditions on the experience of the journey. A map doesn't know what else you're dealing with on any specific day. So this is similar to a lot of the frameworks I think we use in our work. They're oversimplifications, and they often make it seem like there's only one way to get the outcome you need, even if that way isn't appropriate for what you're dealing with. But there are plenty of other ways to navigate, and one of the most common is markers. Most trails have some sort of formal marking system, and the most visible markers are at the intersections of different trails. But there are other important markers as well. And on endurance rides, it's required to put flags or ribbons to mark each turn, but ride managers will often put a few flags out on long stretches of trail just to ensure the riders, you're okay, you're still on the correct route, you haven't missed a crucial turn. And we literally call those flags confidence markers. And in our work, encouragement from other people, from the right people, acts a lot like these confidence markers. They just tell us we're on the right track to keep going. And having people in your professional circle who can serve that role for you is really important. And speaking of markers, one of the key markers of wisdom is our ability to navigate by instinct. You travel enough, particularly if you travel out into the wild, and a lot of our work is out kind of in the wild, right? Eventually you're going to get lost, and developing a general sense of direction is critical. The biggest shift for me was learning not to panic when I realized I had lost the trail. And I would just stop and start to look for distinct, unique landmarks I'd seen earlier to help me reoriented. This means that you have to kind of become more aware of your surroundings. A lot of the work we do at the higher levels of user experience doesn't fit neatly into traditional common frameworks, but the fact that we use those frameworks earlier on helps us develop the skills to navigate by instinct in this level. Navigating in the wicked domain requires us to develop this instinctual sense of the right direction. So as evidence from the story I started with, attitude has a huge impact on how we handle challenges. And optimism is really easy at the start when you don't have any experience and you haven't been beaten down a few times. And optimism doesn't require any commitment. But hope is where we start seeing a certain level of commitment. And Tatiana Mack has a great way of framing this. They say optimism is believing things will change. Hope is believing we can change things. So optimism isn't enough. Hope is about responsibility and taking ownership. But even that isn't enough. I wrote recently about my creative process, and I talked about how it comes in waves, like a series of bursts and busts. And hope's a lot like that, right? It can be hard to maintain hope at a time when we most need it. And that's when we need to become resolute, being purposeful, determined, unwavering. At a certain level, brilliance is often just the ability to keep putting one foot in front of the other when things get hard. The optimism gets you in the car, hope gets you on the trail, resolution gets you to the top. In his book, Epstein talks about this concept of desirable difficulties. There are obstacles that make learning more challenging and slower and frustrating in the short term, but better in the long term because they make knowledge both durable and flexible. We call these types of challenges productive struggle. It's a struggle that builds rather than breaks. And I think that's a concept to really keep in your head. If you're in any type of leadership position, letting your team see you struggle as you work these challenges can be incredibly valuable, but only in the right context. Productive struggle does not result in suffering, right? Struggling through the wrong things, though, that's problematic. Which leads me to terrain. Terrain is the environment you're working in. Like altitude, different types of terrain can make things that are normally really easy for you suddenly feel really hard. If all you've ever encountered on trails is firmly packed clay, you're going to be tested in a completely new way if you suddenly encounter deep sand or rocky trails. The thing is, it can be challenging or even impossible to train explicitly for terrains you just don't encounter often. So better than specific specialized training, there's a focus on foundational fitness, things like strength, endurance, flexibility. The method of training matters less than consistency. So for me personally, whenever I'm struggling at work, there are two things I always know I can fall back on. Research, if I'm struggling, if I can't answer a question, if I'm not sure on the right track, I need to do more research. And collaboration, I need to pull more people in to help me. These things have never failed to help me. So thinking about what are my elements of foundational design fitness, in work to practice those. But even with proper training, sometimes you end up in over your head. You need to be willing to change course for your safety. And I do not believe it's a contradiction to talk about being resolute and to talk about being willing to change course. It's about what's right for each situation. Epstein says that tolerating big mistakes can create the best learning environments, but we all know that's only true if you have a safe environment. Because there's a big difference between, oops, big mistake, that hike took me 2 hours longer than expected, and oops, I got in over my head, I refused to turn around, and I fell off a fucking cliff. So wisdom is knowing when to push and when to pivot. And I don't think we talk about this enough. Is something hard or is something dangerous? Ask yourself, what outcome am I hoping for? And is this path likely to get me to that outcome? Is there another route to that outcome that's easier? Because if there is, then fucking take it. Do hard things because they are the things that stand between you and the outcomes you want. Do not do hard things for the sole reason they're hard. That will leave you crying on the side of the trail, and it's hustle culture, and it's fucking toxic, not to mention privilege. One of the reasons hustle culture exists is because so many people find their validation through work. And I'm here to say it's perfectly fine and healthy to want to do good work and get recognized for it. It's like those confidence markers on the trail. But if you only take one thing from this talk, I hope it is this. You have inherent value, period. Every single one of you has worth that has nothing to do with your resume, your title, your salary. You don't need to do anything to earn your space on this earth. One of the biggest paradoxes of doing consistently good work is that it starts to make you think that good work is what makes you a good person, particularly when you're working in a field that calls itself human-centered. There is so much value that doesn't tie directly to our traditional markers of success. And the sooner you realize that, the more real impact you can have. Because when you recognize you have inherent value, you're willing to say no to things that aren't right for you, to things that don't align with your principles. And as I've explored anti-racist work, what I've learned about white supremacy is that it sells us this false narrative that we have to earn our worth, and then it creates systems explicitly designed to make it really hard or even impossible for some people to earn their worth. And that leads me to my next point. So our work is wicked hard because that work and the systems of our work are complex. But lately it's been feeling like not only is the work wicked hard, but that our industry is just kind of a little wicked, like evil wicked, like not only capable of harming people wicked, but intentionally designed to harm people wicked. And I wonder, is it possible for us not to make our work easier, but to make our work kinder? The wicked good mindset might help us navigate wicked hard environments, but what helps us navigate the wickedness in our environment? So grit is important, resilience, persistence, hard work, all of these things are necessary, but we can't continue to blame individuals for systemic failures. Conversations about grit and resilience are meaningless if they don't also reflect on the systemic inequalities in our industry, in our society. And these inequalities and injustices are reflected in the tech we build and the tech we use. I could fill every slide in this deck with stuff like this. Surveillance capitalism, misinformation, sexism and racism built into our foundations, terrorists fueled by social media. And when you see this over and over again, when you experience this daily, it can be so demoralizing. Everything seems to be stacked against us making any meaningful change. The metrics of success that drive big tech and that drive almost all business are all about more. Make more money, get more users, more clicks, more downloads, more data, more engagement, more attention. There is never enough. If an organization has no bottom, no moral grounding, then there simply is no top. And it's like me climbing up that mountain, never being able to get to the top. And in many ways, UXers often feel like the canaries in the coal mine because of the relational nature of our work, because of the very human-centeredness of our work. It feels like we recognize the weight of this in the way others don't. And I think of this line from UX Collective's 2021 State of UX, and it was just suspended in this heavy white space, and I felt it in my soul. Things are not okay. This is not the happy place design thinking promised me. I believe our industry is desperately out of balance, and it's out of balance for a lot of reasons. And I wonder, what even does balance look like? What models of balance do we have in complex ecosystems? And I wonder, and only some of this is in our control, right? But what if instead of thinking of success as constant expansion, is always more or bigger, we thought of success as sustainability, like meeting our own needs, meeting everybody's needs in balance with the resources we have access to. And for models of this, we go back to nature. So I think of Suzanne Simard's work mapping the communication networks of forests. And she's discovered that fungal threads link nearly every tree in a forest, even trees of different species. They communicate with each other, they share carbon and other resources, they warn of danger. And clear cutting creates oversimplified forests that lack complexity, they lack diversity, they lose the essential hub trees, and that makes them incredibly susceptible to disease and insects. But Simard has found that the forest, as complex systems, have enormous capacity to self-heal, and I believe we do too. Here's another example. In 1995, a pack of 15 wolves was released into Yellowstone. They had been hunted out of the area years ago, and the result was an overpopulation of elk, which was having damaging effects on the entire ecosystem. And returning that apex predator to the ecosystem created this necessary balance between predator and prey, which allowed other more diverse species of plants and animals to move in and thrive, which then reduced erosion, which stabilized the riverbanks, which led to even more diversity and stability. The wolves were able to do what all kinds of human interventions could not, restore balance. Now, I'm not saying you need to visualize yourself as a member of a pack of wolves and like Facebook as an elk you're stalking and taking down, but if that visual works with you, you go ahead and use this. But what happens when you throw people in this mix? It's usually disaster, but there are examples of this. I don't know if anyone's seen this, but there's a documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. It was released in 2018. And it follows a couple as they find kind of really dried up barren land and transform it slowly and painfully with a ton of help to a thriving farm working in balance with nature. And there's a lot of really interesting lessons about how a commitment to that balance and sustainability, while incredibly challenging, eventually pays off with rich diversity, to the point that the balance in the environment starts to require minimal human intervention to maintain. And I love this quote from the film. If we've learned anything, forward momentum and hope, that's what nurtures luck, which can look as simple as the wind changing direction. So what does that wind changing direction look like? So the recurring traits of these balanced, sustainable environments seem to be these four things: direct connections and cooperation amongst the different species, a broad diversity of plants and animals to balance against each other, and a recognition of the interdependence between us and our environments. When our environment is out of balance, so are we. The thing is, restoring balance takes time. Nature is self-healing, but it needs time. And it can be really hard to see signs that your efforts are having any kind of impact. So I've started looking for signs. I've started looking for small signs that we're moving towards balance. It's things like the reactions against Google's firing of lead AI researcher Timnit Gebru. Other researchers, other organizations are publicly breaking ties with Google and putting very visible pressure on them to get their shit together. It's seeing people like Arlen Hamilton and others. Arlen started Backstage Capital, and she's shifting the balance in VC funding models, prioritizing historically underinvested, or a term I much prefer that she calls it, underestimated founders, and be really successful at it. In awareness of misinformation and the work Nadini Jami and Claire Atkin are doing with Check My Ads, helping organizations be more responsible about what media they support with their ad dollars. And absolutely, Congress, get your shit together. We need more accountability and we need regulation. I need more wolves in Congress. So we've all heard this thing, you know, Mr. Rogers told us when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mom would say to me, look for the helpers. Well, I don't know about you, but my defense mechanisms have been on overload, and I'm now like wired to only see those are hurting. The way I'm trying to build hope is to actively look for those who are helping. And while not a single one of these people alone is going to change the world, collectively, progressively, we can start to move towards balance. So the problems we're facing seem so big that their sheer scope can make us feel really powerless and really small. But then I think about the quote about actors, that there are no small parts, only small actors. Even small things can have an impact when you layer on that connection, cooperation, diversity, and interdependence. In pushing yourself to look for and embrace these small positive changes is actually a radical act of hope. The key is to connect, to layer a bunch of these small changes so they collectively become big and powerful. And I'm going to give you an example of what this might look like. So let's say this is me inside just one of these problem spaces, and I have an idea, and I do have an idea. And it's not a big, grandiose idea. It's just one little small idea. And this idea I'm working on right now is starting to bake in accessibility work on all the projects I sell, rather than having it be an optional line item for our clients. Rather than trying to sell clients on the value of accessibility, I just sell it as part of the process as a whole. Because that means I started viewing my job as doing what's right, not doing what I'm asked. So say I start doing this and I share this idea with some teammates at work, I share it with my team, there's broader adoption, and maybe it becomes an organizational standard. So I'm starting to be able to influence at multiple levels here in the organization and the clients we work on with projects. And as my organization interacts with more clients, even though this work only impacts a small percentage of them, the ones it does impact can also spread that impact. But it doesn't stop there either. If I share this idea with my community, like at a meetup, then even if only a small percentage of my community decides to try something similar, you can see how this spreads. And it starts to look a lot like Suzanne Simard's diagram of the forest communication system, because this is how networks work, whether they're birch and fir trees or designers and developers. And the thing is, we often dismiss small efforts like this because the promises of big, sweeping transformations are so incredibly appealing and sexy, but so rarely successful. I think small is sexy because getting shit done is a lot sexier than crying about the problems being too big. And when I feel I'm working too small or too slowly, I think of this quote by Maggie Smith. Think about geological time, how the slightest shifts, imperceptible daily, carve canyons and make mountains. Trust that you are making progress even if you can't see it. The most impactful and lasting changes happen slowly over time. If we are directionally correct, if we agree together on the correct direction, we have to trust we are making progress even when we can't see it. A very long time ago, like a million years ago, I was a competitive gymnast. And I can tell you that there is true power when you combine balance with momentum. So the whole fucking move fast and break things attitude has gotten here, and we have to toss that shit. My navigation instincts have kicked in, and they're telling me loud and clear that it's time to change course. We need to take a deep breath and slow the fuck down. The only way I've consistently been able to tackle really gnarly messes is to think about how I can do it slower and make it smaller, because then everyone is safer. At many long distance events, it's customary to give a special award to some kind of person who finishes last. In endurance riding, this was called the Turtle Award, and they were not given in jest because these events were hard and just finishing one was an accomplishment. At my very first 50-mile endurance ride, I was thrilled to receive this award. I was so much later than the previous finisher that they had started the potluck without me. But the vet checking out my horse at the end told me a third of the riders didn't finish because the course was so tough, and told me my horse looked like she could have gone for another loop. And that's the highest compliment you can get, that you've taken care of your partner. Almost any one of us can get through a single hard race alone. But in order to have an enduring career, we need to slow down, we need to act small consistently, and we need to restore our community so that these small acts can have a big impact. My hope is that's how we start to shift the balance. That's how we get wicked good, and that's how we make our wicked world kinder. And kindness starts with yourself, because this approach, it requires a healthy community, and a healthy community requires healthy community members. I don't think we've been doing a great job of taking care of ourselves. Vivianne Castillo so beautifully says, self-care is an ethical imperative. And she's building an amazing community with humanity-centered, where they challenge the status quo of what it means to be human-centered. And it's just another example of us moving towards balance. It's only when we prioritize a sustainable career for ourselves that we can create a more sustainable community of practice for others. This is like, putting on your own mask first, right? As for me, I've decided to start viewing all this anger and outrage as precious, because it represents stored energy just waiting to be unleashed in the right direction. I think we all have some of this energy pent up, and we can either spend it arguing over stupid things on Twitter, like should a designer's code, or we can direct that energy for a higher purpose. Instead of arguing should designers code, maybe we should be arguing about should designers care? What should designers care about? I believe we can have a real impact if we care, but we need to align around the important things and share the weight of the work and make it more tolerable. Reserving your precious fucks for the things that truly matter is a defiant act of self and community care. I want to see us not just survive, but thrive in these wicked hard environments. And I believe a lot of us actually love this work. It's what drew us to this field. Our goal isn't easy. The goal is kind and sustainable, and none of us can do that alone. But maybe together we can create kinder, more equitable, more sustainable environments. The best way to get wicked good is to be wicked kind to ourselves and to each other. That's where we find balance. That's how we build momentum, by caring about and acting on the right things together. I believe the prescription for wicked is kindness, connection, and community. If we do nothing else, let's all try to leave people and communities kinder than we found them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was amazing. I have like 40 Post-it notes in front of me now. like so many quotables. Would anyone like to unmute and ask Karen a question? Or you can put it in the chat and I will be happy to ask on your behalf. Either way. Or Al can, Kim if she's here. I know I loved that you talked about wisdom is knowing when to push and when to pivot. And I think that that has been something that I've discovered myself, particularly in relationship to my career in the last few years, like living, you know, there's being, you know, a little afraid of taking risk and being risk averse to the point that you're cutting yourself off at the knees. And I made that decision that it was time to pivot, that I'd pushed long enough, you know, and that I was pushing a mountain that wasn't going to move.
Yeah.
And can you, you know, sometimes it's just, you just know in your gut, it's not where you're supposed to be. You don't know where you're supposed to be, but you're going to have to take a little bit of a leap. And I'm a hiker too. And a lot of times I'll go to places that I've not been before. And there's always a little bit of mystery in that. You don't know what lies ahead on the trail. Maybe it's not been maintained, or maybe a tree fell overnight, or the blazes are hard to find. But there is always, like, when you're doing those kind of hikes, you're operating a lot of the time on instinct. You have some guides along the way, but you're really having to trust your gut. And I loved about how you talked when you were talking about how you can't prepare for every kind of terrain. And Mount Tomsock here is our highest mountain. Don't laugh. We still call them mountains, even though they're kind of just.
Hey, I'm from Michigan, so there's no shade over here.
Right. Like, you know, the Rockies snicker at us, but they are technically mountains. And it's got lots of little rocks. And even though I had, before I started having as many mobility problems as I'm having now, it was one of my favorite hikes. But one of the hardest things about that hike was not the distance or the elevation, but it was the terrain, because the rocks would shift under your feet. And it was something that you just couldn't really, there was no way to prepare for it. And you had to really trust your instincts to stay safe throughout that journey. But it was such a feeling of accomplishment too, because it was a no switchback, straight down, straight up. But if you stuck with it, you got to see a waterfall, you know, there's all kinds of cool stuff to see. And I think that, and then I've had other experience where I've gotten on a trail and I'm like, nope, we're heading back. This is not a trail that's been maintained and it isn't safe to go forward, and knowing when to pivot. And it's okay. Like, it wasn't a bad choice to take the hike, but it would be a bad choice to continue. And I think sometimes career moves can be like that. Like, you're like, oh, I tried a new thing and it's not a good fit. And that doesn't mean that I failed somehow. It's just not a good fit and I need to pivot. I don't think we talk about that stuff enough.
And it's interesting, the things that we glamorize and celebrate. On another Slack channel I was on, someone just shared a video of a male gymnast. I think the US trials are going on now. And he fell off the high bar like 3 times but he kept getting up and finished. Well, as everybody's like, oh my God, that's so inspirational, I cried. And I'm like, did you see his head snap back on the first fall? Why is that you know, I can appreciate, you know, respecting someone pushing through, but there's a real chance of injury. And then I think what I love, like Naomi Osaka pulling out, was it the French Open, you know, for her mental health. And I hope we have more examples like that, because we haven't, the only examples we hold up are people just pushing through, you know. And I think of, like, I have a lot of gymnast examples, but I think of that Carrie Strug vault on the broken ankle and how everyone was celebrating. The US team didn't even need her to do that vault. They had already won. So we need to start celebrating people making really great choices for themselves, whatever that is, not only celebrating pushing.
I had a boss who would occasionally send out an email that would say something like, hey guys, I am under a lot of stress right now and I need to take a mental health day. And every time he sent something like that, I would say, thank you. Thank you so much for being in a leadership position and being transparent and setting that example. Like, I wish that more leaders would take that approach, because I think that there's a lot of fear in the workplace about practicing self-care. I think we are shifting, and there's more companies that are like, don't ask, if you need a day, you need a day. You don't need to explain. Where before it was like, we want your doctor's note and a call from your mom and, the blood of your firstborn. Like, it used to be really rigid requirements. And I think that things have eased up over time, but there's still, I think, a little bit of fear for people to take that time for themselves, even when they have. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I have to take vacation or I'm going to lose it. And I'm like, what is the matter with you? Why do you have that much vacation? Like, Elena, we will chat later. Yeah.
You're talking to the person who just took 20 days off in a row. I've never done that before. It was amazing.
Yeah, but okay, but it had some purpose. Like, it gave you an opportunity to take a trip of a lifetime, right? And you didn't let it just roll over and disappear into nothing.
Yeah.
You took it. Like, and I think that I still feel like pangs of guilt anytime I need to take off for a doctor's appointment, because we are conditioned for the hustle. And I love that you called that out, that hustle culture is really toxic, and that that is an area that we need to pivot. And
also, if you think about who can afford to hustle, it's people who have a certain level of security, who aren't, caretaking, whether it's for children or for other relatives. That's why hustle culture is also privileged, right? I mean, it's the same thing like, take home assignments for job interviews. If you're going to require someone to work on something for 4 hours, you are automatically eliminating certain people who don't have an extra 4 hours in the day on top of their job. And, it is so clear, if you do any research into natural ecosystems, that the key to that balance is diversity. And yet, and we preach about the importance of diversity in our field, and then we create systems from the hiring process on through that just, we really want diverse candidates, and we're going to make it impossible for a whole segment of the population to actually make it through our interview process. So the actions are speaking a lot louder than the words there.
Oh, 100%. And the thing that I've been talking to manager friends about lately and trying to be more vocal about is, when you write job descriptions, is a degree a want or a need? Because a lot of times it's really just a want. And you may be excluding candidates that have really great life experience that's going to inform their work, that are things that could never be taught in the classroom.
Yeah.
And when it comes to some of those applied skills, how much I use from my degree at work is a pretty small percentage. And it definitely could be taught to me on the job.
Well, and especially like as Epstein talks about in the book, and he has so many examples of it, a diverse experience, a meandering path is what gives you that cognitive flexibility. And, if you have someone who's only ever done one thing, I got my degree in this, I got my first job in this, I got my second job in this, how much of that flexibility are they picking up? Not a lot. And there's definitely a place for that deep specialization, but it has to be balanced out with that breadth.
yeah, like not all team extrovert or team introvert, not all. And I think like with the education, that can be a very privileged thing. You know, when I was growing up, I went to city public schools. We didn't have college counselors. Nobody talked like I think A, there wasn't a budget for it, and B, I don't think anybody thought anybody was going to college anyway, you know? And I ended up getting my GED and going to community college earlier because that's what made sense for me. But I had all this shame around it for a really long time. I was very embarrassed and very like, you know, until I finished my bachelor's degree, was just constantly on edge because I felt so judged externally because of the things, even though I had tons of work experience that was very valuable and I was good at what I did, I still that you know, you need to check these boxes thing, I think can be really damaging and really limiting to people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And it certainly uh, can be really divisive in a lot of ways. And you can be missing a lot of good talent by making it required instead of preferred, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I think that's one easy way to be kinder. And I loved how you talked about even small things can have impact when you layer that connection, diversity, and interdependence. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of those bumper stickers that used to say, think globally, act locally. You know, it's the
It's the same
same
principle.
idea. Yeah, the same principle that, and accessibility is a perfect example. You don't have to be an expert to make a difference. You know, little changes can make a really big difference for a lot of people. And if you don't do it perfect, that's okay. Like, we all have to start learning somewhere. It's better to do something than to do nothing, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a question in there and in here about like what are your thoughts on lean UX? And there's some overlay if we talk about principles, not practices or ceremonies with lean and with agile. And it is a bias towards action, but small. You know, you reduce the risk and the weight by doing things small and incrementally. And I think we need to start applying. I think, you know, remember my Twitter handle is designing inward. We need to start applying some of the principles we use in our work on products and services and use it internally on our organizations and our careers as well. We have the skills to do this. We somehow don't think, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever like tried to design think my way into or out of like a romantic relationship. You know, we have the skills to do this since a lot of the tools we have can work in this context, but we have to, it's something about like we get into a different problem space and all we can see is how big it is. But if you start breaking it down just the way you would a problem at work, okay, you know, this is in my domain. This is what I have the energy for. This is what I have the skills for. Here's my little thing. This I can do. And if 10 other people are doing that, those little things are all of a sudden bigger. But you can't do it by yourself, which is one of the
Yeah,
reasons I'm
like
here.
if we're all just a bunch of, we're all dropping a seed bombs, right? Like, eventually we're going to have wildflowers everywhere.
Yeah, we can be like the
So,
border collies who have the backpacks of seeds that they let loose to reforest.
oh, I don't know about those guys. I love
Yeah,
border collies.
they
Those
have
might be
them
my
trained to
favorite.
scatter seeds. Look it up on YouTube. They have videos.
This sounds like an instant dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds good. This sounds like good emotional self-care. I'm going to call on Elena to ask a question because I know
Did you know that
who
I was
Miss
thinking
Elena
on
is.
things?
I know you are a good deep thinker.
Mine is not so much a question, but so much more than a statement. I mean, it's truly validating and refreshing to hear the thoughts that are happening in my head kind of vocalized and saying like, and hearing, hustle culture just being shit on, and we really need to take care of ourselves. I just think about, I'm on a team at work for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, there's this push for diversity. And it's, as we were talking, or you guys were talking, well, what does that really mean? I mean, we can make the room look pretty and diverse, but on the back end, if I'm somebody, as I am, somebody with 4 children, how diverse do you really want? To what extent of diversity are you really looking for? And so, I've been lucky to work with someone who's, a bit flexible in scheduling and things like that. But I still feel this, and I work in academia, so it's even more so there, right? This like brownie points for staying late, working on the weekends, being available after work hours. I mean, it is treacherous. And a lot of this talk is just really refreshing. So I appreciate it.
One of the things I love about so many of the examples in nature, and there are so many examples of this in The Biggest Little Farm, but you have to create the environment first in order to get the diversity. Like when the wolves returned to, it wasn't until the wolves returned and started kind of regulating the population of the elk that then made room for other species to come in, that then stabilized the riverbank. So like, if they didn't bring all the diverse species in, they brought in the apex predator. And so then created the space, the healthy space for a diverse environment. And I think a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion is just like, let's just plop a bunch of, different color, different gendered people in here, not what is the type of environment where a diverse community can thrive. Like we're thinking the wrong way. And I think we're starting, I highly recommend if you have the means, although I think there's some scholarships too, and haven't already, there's, the cohort, the community, the humanity-centered Vivianne Castillo's cohort. It's just amazing. And it's really helped me think differently about our work, and particularly the importance of diversity to it, but also reframing what a diverse community means. I think we need to start talking differently about it.
I think, and tell me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Karen. I almost feel like the emphasis needs to be heavier. It's like, we got the concept of diversity, we get that. The emphasis really needs to be on the inclusion, that who are we asking the question, who are we excluding, who should we be intentionally including, and are we being inclusive? Because people seem to have a kind of general awareness of what diversity is supposed to mean, but it's like they're not getting the inclusive part, like how that's supposed to play out. Like Elena was talking about the D&I at the university she works at, the workshops. I used to work at the same university, and it was all about diversity. But when you would hear about the inclusion, there wasn't a lot of talk about how do you go about being inclusive? What does that mean? Like in a very applied way. So when you're at work, how can you include your coworkers who may be different from you so that they feel welcomed and psychologically safe at work? And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can tell, but I am extremely white. So,
no.
But I think And I live in a very white city, right? And what I think is interesting is diversity is something people think they can see. What happens with the inclusion part, or what usually doesn't happen, is whoever we bring into the environment, then we expect to adopt the behaviors, the language, the customs that are already existing. Rather than, inclusion is you get to be here. You don't have to talk like me. You don't have to look like me. I don't have those type of expectations. I think too many times what I've seen happen and what I have been guilty of is I expect people to meet me on my level because I'm already here, rather than we are equal partners and each of our experiences is equally valid. And I am not a D&I expert, but it is so much about, let's take another example. Let's go back to the whole concept of mental health days. I remember at a previous org I was at, it was the most stressful job I ever had. It was toxic. And the organization spent so much time and money on talking about the importance of mental health and mental health benefits, and I was told when I was completely fried and burnt out, take a mental health day. And I'm like, so that means I will have twice as much work the next day. You have to look at the environment is creating the problems. And if the environment is creating the problems, then all the mental health benefits in the world aren't going to help the situation. I think it's the same thing with D&I. Like, if you don't change the environment, it doesn't matter who you bring in. If you buy a new plant and you give it plenty of sunlight and never water it and it dies, whose fault is that? We have a responsibility when we bring people into our environment to give each person what they need to thrive. In everybody, I don't even care if you're all the same color skin, the same sexual orientation, everybody needs something different to thrive. I've never known two people who need the same thing.
No, absolutely. Now I'm gonna pick on my buddy Brett because he's another smarty, and I suspect he's got a great question. Unless he wandered off, in which case my former student Jessica is gonna get it.
Hey, everyone,
there's Brett. I gotcha.
I didn't wander off here. Let me get some light so you can actually see me. I didn't wander off. I've been kind of listening as I'm walking around, and I joined late, so I don't have any questions. But just after listening to the last 5 minutes, I'm really sorry I missed the previous 30. So I'm looking forward to the recording. So good stuff. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett. Jessica, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm definitely echoing what others have said, as this is very cathartic and validating to hear. TMI, I may be, PMSing, shed a tear or two at some point. So, thanks, Karen, for making me cry. But my biggest struggle is with imposter syndrome. And I don't know when I actually get to that next level, like that inherent value that we all have is sometimes hard to recognize with imposter syndrome. And I was just wondering if you had any comments on that.
I have 2 or 3 things to say about that. One, you aren't struggling from imposter syndrome. You're a woman in technology. And where was there? It was in Harvard Business Review. There was an article about how imposter syndrome is actually not really a thing. It's just called being a woman in technology. I will tell you, the work of accepting that I have inherent worth, that my worth is not tied to my productivity, will be something I am working on for my entire life. And I don't know if I will ever truly accept that. You can know something intellectually, and being able to like actually feel it is a completely different thing. And I'm with you. I don't feel it. I feel like I am a complete piece of shit a lot of times. But I also know that it takes a long time. Habits are really hard to break, and the only way to do that is to layer on new habits. And so, again, it's small things. I'm trying to catch myself when I hear that negative self-talk. I'm reading a book, which is not, I put a link to a post on my website that has my reading list for this. I just started a new book that is not on this, but it's called How to Do the Work. And it's kind of like a holistic psychology thing, but it's all about learning to first recognize your negative patterns, your thought patterns and your behavior patterns, and then creating, like laying over these new habits of thinking on top of them. And it's going to feel really weird and awkward at first. But again, this is a lot of what we do in our work is we're like, what behaviors do I want to motivate in the users or the consumers of the services and the tools that I'm building? And framing it that way for me feels a very safe space. If I think I'm just doing the same work I do all the time, I'm just the subject of my activities now. But honestly, I will probably, I shouldn't sound so non-optimistic. I will continue to try, but I think we are trying to undo like a lifetime of thinking, and it's hard.
It's like a systemic beatdown that we've been enduring for an awfully long time as women in particular, you know, to feel free to take up space. I mean, even you think about those studies where they look at women in public transportation and like the man spread, right? Like the dude sits down and very comfortably takes up like 2.5 seats. And we're taught to like fold ourselves into a pretzel and squeeze into a corner. And that if we do something else, that somehow that's inappropriate or unladylike. And so to shake all that off, I think, and expect that to just evaporate overnight, I think, like you said, it is a really, you know, there's a lot of cultural undoing. Oh, hi, doggy. A lot of cultural undoing, and then we're being hit with all that still. You know, it's not like we got over it. It's still out there all the time. And I do think that often women are held to a higher standard in many things, you know, to be successful at work and run a home, you know, run the household and it can be really hard. Sometimes I think, gosh, I wish I could hand over, like I look at Jessica, she's a former student and she's amazing. And I think I wish I could just like box that up and hand it over to someone, like the beauty and talent and gifts that I can see in someone else, that I could just like make it tangible somehow so they could just have it and not have to go through all that struggle. But I do think that there's value in the struggle too. And I like that you talked about that in your talk tonight as well.
Yeah, those productive struggles, you know, it's the same thing like weight training, right? Strength training is about resistance, pushing against, you know, resistance. Yeah, and then it gets back to knowing yourself and being, it's that self-awareness and that situational awareness and being able to understand that, okay, now is the time to push. Now is the time to back off or turn around. I was thinking about failure this morning. I think about failure a lot. And it's really interesting. I've done a lot of work on, you know, looking at what makes a healthy teams, and in the healthiest, most successful teams also fail the most often. And we talk about the importance of learning from failure. Sometimes what failure is telling you is you were doing the wrong thing. And I don't think we say that enough. And I think it's okay to have a failure and say, you know what? I'm not going to get up and keep going because that failure just told me, I was on the wrong path. And then the flip side, and I want to do an entire talk on this one video. It's Tony Hawk at the X Games, the first time he landed like a 960 or something like that. And he didn't actually land it in the competition, but they let him keep going. He wasn't getting scored on it. And each time, like first he's over rotating and then he's under rotating and he's getting closer and closer. And what's so great about the video is you also see all the other skaters on the ramp and they're all like doing their little, woo, trying to like send him positive vibes. And he also reflected on that experience 10 years later. And he said that ramp was so well built that he was able to get speed he'd never gotten before. And I think it took like 7 or 8 tries and he actually landed it. But 1, he was close. 2, he was getting feedback that was telling him very clearly what he needed to change each time. He was getting encouragement from the other people in his environment. That ramp was built to support what he wanted to do. And I think that's a great example of what I call practicing failure, right? So what type of feedback are you getting? Is it clear to you what you need to do a little better next time? Because if you're not getting that feedback, that's what's going to burn you out. It's that feedback that can turn a failure into something positive. And if you're not getting the feedback, the failure is you're done. Okay. If you aren't getting feedback from it, that's going to burn you out.
I think we have time for just one or two more questions. Somebody on Twitter yesterday was saying like, how do I get unstuck? And I was like, grab a brainstorm buddy. That's how I get unstuck. 2 heads are always better than 1. And it's because of that like encouragement and the support. And frankly, 1 head can only think so many things, right? Like I'm a big believer in the power of community. And I love I'm a skateboard lover from way back. So thank you for talking about Tony Hawk. That makes my heart.
I love him too. His stories on Twitter where people always tell him he looks like Tony Hawk, but they never actually know that he's really Tony Hawk.
Yeah, he's like definitely, kind of undercover celeb, and he helped build a skate park near here in a low-income neighborhood. So he's an all right guy in my book. Michael says, amen to that about failure and feedback. And I think, you don't have to work very hard to find quotes from very successful people who talk about failing a lot is the key to their success. That sometimes you learn more from what you did wrong than what you did right. And things like collaboration and being a part of communities like this will open the door for opportunities to get feedback. If you're just out there doing your own thing and you're competing against everyone instead of collaborating with them, you're never going to get that valuable feedback. And it's one of the things that I love about the UX community is that it is warm and engaging and collaborative. And I always tell people who are new, if you meet anyone who doesn't fit that, they're like an interloper. I don't know, they sit in the back door, run. Like I'm not sure why they're here, but they won't be here long, because that's what we're really about. If we're human-centered practitioners, then surely we should be here to support one another, right?
Yeah, empathy needs to start here,
Yeah, so we have Elena, do you want to go ahead? I can pull up our membership. Elena is also, and thank you to my pals and former students and my good buddy Brett for letting me pick on you. I only pick on the ones I like,
Yeah, if you want to pull it up. I'm kind of the new kid on the block here. I am the new membership coordinator to the St. Louis Design experienced team. So we're a pretty small team in the area who holds events like this. So we can have awesome talks, get together, share stories, share tears. And if you would like to become a member, as soon as Holly pulls it up, I think I can probably.
Holly's the slowest Zoom sharer in the world. Hold on. And share all the feels tonight. I don't know about you guys, but I've got all the feels. I'm right there with Jessica.
Great.
Can you guys see
So-
that?
Yep. So we do have membership tiers for anybody who's interested in becoming a member of the STLX group. There are tons of benefits. Obviously there's, business level tier, but for our pro people, you'll get, free STLX stickers, discounted tickets to an STLX paid event. That's a $65 level. And then there's student membership, so a little bit more discount for those folks who are students. So hopefully in the near future, we will be doing these events in person, meetups in person, and we'll be able to hang out with each other and see each other's lovely faces in person. But please feel free to capture this code on the screen to sign up for membership, get all the swag, and keep up with our talks here that we have going on. I feel like I missed
Yes.
something.
Well, and to anyone